Welcome to the Mindful Practice Podcast, a space for physicians navigating burnout, identity shifts, and career change without pressure or judgment. I'm your host, Dr. Bertina Hooks, a board-certified internal medicine physician, coach, and writer. Here we talk honestly about what it means to build a sustainable career and a life beyond medicine and survival. Hello, and welcome to the Mindful Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bertina Hooks, a physician, entrepreneur, coach, speaker, and author of the upcoming memoir, From Fire to Freedom, a memoir of transformation, renewal, and resilience. Today, we're continuing our DEI in Medicine series with a special book spotlight. We're going to discuss 3 important books that examine diversity, equity, and inclusion in medicine from different perspectives. The 3 books are The Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington, The Immortal Life of Henrietta by Rebecca Skloot, and Twice as Hard by Jasmine Brown. These are not light books. They address painful histories, ethical failures, systemic discrimination, patient exploitation, racial inequality, and the experiences of Black people within American medicine. And they are necessary literature because we cannot build a more equitable healthcare system without understanding how the current system was shaped. Diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot be reduced to a yearly training module. It cannot be limited to a statement on an organization's website. It cannot be addressed simply by recruiting a few people from underrepresented backgrounds while leaving the entire culture unchanged. Meaningful DEI work requires historical understanding. It requires accountability. It requires changes in policy, leadership, research, education, and clinical practice. It requires us to listen to the people whose experiences have often been excluded from the dominant story of medicine. Books give us one way to enter those conversations. They allow us to slow down, to examine the experiences behind the statistics, and they challenge us to confront parts of medical history that may not have been included in our formal education. Let's begin with the first selection. Book 1, The Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. This book examines the history of medical experimentation involving African Americans, from the era of slavery through more modern medical research. It documents how Black bodies have been used, studied, exploited, and harmed within medical and scientific systems. This book is difficult to read because it forces us to confront the fact that some medical advancements occurred within systems that did not recognize Black people as fully autonomous human beings. When we discuss distrust of the medical system in Black communities, the conversation is sometimes framed as though the distrust is irrational. Healthcare professionals may ask, why won't they participate in research? Why don't they trust physicians? Why are they hesitant about a recommended treatment? But trust does not exist independently of history. Trust is built or destroyed through experiences. And communities remember. They remember experimentation without meaningful consent. They remember segregation in hospitals. They remember being denied treatment. They remember pain being dismissed. They remember relatives who entered healthcare systems and did not return home. They remember being treated as subjects rather than partners. Medical Apartheid helps explain why mistrust is not simply an attitude that healthcare professionals should try to correct. It is often a response to documented harm. The book presents a broad history of Black Americans being used as unwilling or uninformed subjects within medical experimentation. One of the most important lessons from this book is that informed consent must involve more than obtaining a signature. A patient can sign a form without truly understanding what's happening. A person can technically agree while being pressured by authority, economic need, fear, limited choices, or inadequate information. Ethical care requires us to ask, does this person understand the risk? Do they understand the alternatives? Have we explained the information in an accessible language? Do they have the freedom to decline? Is there power imbalance influencing the decision? And are the people bearing the risk of research also likely to benefit from its discoveries? This book challenges the comforting belief that unethical medical experimentation belongs only in the distant past. History matters because systems and beliefs do not disappear automatically. Bias can remain embedded in clinical algorithms. It can remain in research recruitment. It can remain in whose pain is believed. It can remain in those who receive referrals, procedures, pain medication, preventative care, and follow-up. It can remain in the assumption healthcare professionals make before a patient has said a single word. The purpose of learning this history is not to create paralyzing guilt. The purpose is to create informed responsibility. Once we know what happened, we must examine what continues and decide what we are willing to change. My reflection question for a medical apartheid is this: how can healthcare institutions expect historically harmed communities to offer trust without first demonstrating transparency, accountability, and change? Trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned. The second book is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Our second selection is about Henrietta Lacks, a Black woman whose cancer cells were taken during treatment without her knowledge or permission. Those cells became known as HeLa cells. They became extraordinarily important to medical research and continued reproducing in laboratories long after her death. Her cells contributed to scientific progress, and for many years her family knew little about how the cells were being used, while researchers and commercial industries benefit from them. Henrietta's story raises profound questions. Who owns biological material removed from a patient's body? What does informed consent mean in medical research? What benefits financially from scientific discovery? What obligations do researchers have to patients and their families? And how do race, poverty, education, and power influence whose bodies become resources for medical advancement? One reason this book is so powerful is that it restores a person to be a story that often have been told primarily as a scientific achievement. HeLa cells are not merely a laboratory tool. They came from a woman, a wife, a mother, a human being with a family, history, fears, relationship, and dignity. That distinction matters. Medicine often celebrates discoveries while minimizing the stories of the people whose bodies made those discoveries possible. We discuss the transplant but forget the donor. We discuss the specimen but forget the patient. We discuss the breakthrough but forget the person who absorbed the risk. I remember sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, unable to make myself walk inside. That's the moment I realized burnout wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. Medical school taught us how to practice medicine. Nobody taught us how to intentionally design a career or a life that actually fits who we've become. That realization led me to build a simple framework. 5 steps I now call the 5 R's that took me from being an overwhelmed and uncertain physician to a clear, confident, and financially resistant one. I've walked this path myself, and I've now guided other physicians through it too. Physicians who didn't think there was a way out. If you're a physician who knows something has to change, I'm teaching this entire framework live and completely free. Go to the website below to save and reserve your seat. The story of Henrietta Lacks also illustrates the difference between being visible and being valued. Her cells became globally known within science, but Henrietta herself remained largely invisible for years. Her biological material was valuable, but she was not given the recognition, information, autonomy, or protection that should have accompanied that value. That pattern extends beyond Henrietta's individual story. Marginalized communities are frequently asked to contribute to institutions that do not share power, credit, resources, or benefits equitably. People may be recruited for research without being represented in research leadership. Communities may provide data without participating in decisions about how the data is used. Patients may contribute stories to institutional campaigns without seeing meaningful improvement in the conditions they described or suffer from. Inclusion without power is not equity. Representation without respect is not justice. This book reminds us that medical language can create distance. We may speak of tissue samples, cell lines, data sets, study populations, and clinical material. Those terms are sometimes necessary, but they can also make it easier to forget that every sample originated from a person. Every data point represented a life. Every chart contains someone's fears, hopes, relationships, and future. Mindful medicine asks us to maintain scientific rigor without losing human connection. My reflection question for the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks is this: how do we ensure that medical advancement honors the humanity, autonomy, and contributions of the people who make that advancement possible? Scientific progress and ethical responsibility should never be treated as opposing goals. Ethics must be part of progress. Book number 3 is Twice as Hard by Jasmine Brown. Twice as Hard: The Stories of Black Women who fought to become physicians from the Civil War to the 21st century by Jasmine Brown focuses on the lives and careers of pioneering Black women physicians. It tells the story of women who pursued medicine despite barriers created by both racism and sexism. Some entered institutions where they were excluded socially, denied equal access to facilities, questioned intellectually, and forced to prove themselves repeatedly. Yet they persisted. They practiced medicine. They served communities. They challenged discriminatory systems. And they helped create pathways for future generations of physicians like myself. Among the women discussed is Dr. Edith Irby Jones, who became the first African American admitted to a previously white-only medical school in the Jim Crow South and faced overt segregation during her education. The title, Twice as Hard, reflects a reality many Black women understand. It is the experience that you must work harder, prepare more thoroughly, perform more consistently, and make fewer mistakes simply to receive the same recognition afforded to others. This pressure does not disappear when a woman earns a medical degree. Black women physicians may still face assumptions about their role. They may be mistaken for nurses, technicians, assistants, or support personnel. Their expertise may be questioned. Their leadership may be interpreted as aggression. Their confidence may be labeled arrogance. Their concerns may be minimized until repeated by someone else. And even after achieving excellence, they may feel that they are being evaluated not merely as individuals, but as representative of an entire race or gender. Representation in medicine matters. Patients benefit from seeing physicians who understand or are willing to understand their cultures, communities, and lived experiences. Students benefit from mentors who demonstrate that a medical career is possible. Institutions benefit when leadership includes people capable of identifying blind spots that a more homogeneous group might overlook. But representation must extend beyond photographs and recruitment statistics. It must include retention, promotion, pay equity, sponsorship, leadership authority, psychological safety, and the ability to raise concerns without retaliation. It is not enough to bring Black people into medicine. The profession must create conditions in which they can thrive. This book also invites us to reconsider the way medical history is taught. Medical history often centers institutions' discoveries in a relatively narrow group of celebrated individuals, but countless women and people of color practiced, researched, taught, organized, and cared for communities without receiving equal recognition. When their stories are excluded, students receive an incomplete understanding of who built medicine. That exclusion affects the present. People are less likely to imagine themselves belonging in a profession when they never see people like themselves represented in its history. Recovering these stories is not about rewriting history. It's about telling a more complete, accurate version of it. What if the career you work so hard to build isn't the career you have to keep forever? If you're a physician feeling trapped, not because you're not skilled or dedicated, but because no one ever taught you there were other paths, you're not alone and you're not stuck. I'm Dr. Bertina Hooks, and I created the Phoenix Physician Freedom Blueprint, a 5-step framework physicians are using right now to move from burnout to clarity, purpose, and financial freedom. This isn't a theory. It's the exact roadmap I use to rebuild my own career. And it's already working for physicians who felt exactly like you do right now. Clarity, confidence, financial resilience. Join me live for free, and I'll walk you through the entire framework. Register now at the website listed below for the free live masterclass. My reflection question for Twice as Hard is this: what would medicine look like if Black women no longer had to be twice as exceptional to receive half as much recognition? And what policies, leadership decisions, and cultural changes would be required to make that vision real? Now let's connect the 3 books. Although these books approach medicine from different directions, they share several important themes. Medical Apartheid examines exploitation of Black bodies and the historical foundations of medical mistrust. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks focuses on one woman whose cells transformed medical research while her autonomy and family's understanding were largely disregarded. Twice as Hard focuses on Black women physicians to the history of medicine and illustrates the barriers they overcame to enter and transform the profession. Together, the books ask us to consider: who has been harmed by medicine? Who has benefited from medicine? Who has been allowed to practice medicine? Who has received credit? Who has held power? And whose stories have been omitted? These questions are not merely academic. They influence present-day healthcare. They affect whether patients trust physicians. They affect whether communities participate in research. They affect whether diverse trainees feel they belong. They affect who advances into leadership, how healthcare organizations respond when inequity is reported, and they affect whether DEI becomes a genuine institutional commitment or a public relations statement. The 3 books also demonstrate why lived experience matters. Data can identify disparities, but stories help us understand how those disparities are experienced. A statistic may tell us that one group receives less pain treatment. A story helps us understand what it feels like to beg for relief while no one believes you. A statistic may show underrepresentation among physicians. A story helps us understand the isolation of entering a lecture hall where no one looks like you. A historical report may document unethical experimentation, but a personal narrative helps us understand what happens to a family when the scientific community values a person's cells more visibly than it values the person. We need both. We need evidence, and we need humanity. Here's what healthcare professionals can do. After reading these books, the next step should not be defensiveness. The next step should be reflection followed by action. Healthcare professionals can begin by examining personal assumptions. Whose pain do we tend to believe immediately? Who do we describe as difficult? Who do we interrupt? Who receives additional explanation, and who receives rushed instructions? Whose concerns are documented as anxiety rather than being investigated? Who is assumed to be non-compliant without a discussion of barriers? Institutions can examine their systems. Are patients from historically marginalized communities included in program design? Are interpreter services consistently available? Are facilities physically accessible? Do research consent processes account for differences in language, education, and power? Are concerns about discrimination investigated transparently? Or are diverse employees promoted and retained or merely recruited? Do leaders measure equity outcomes with the same seriousness used to measure revenue, quality, and productivity? Medical educators can examine curricula. Are the histories of Black, Indigenous, disabled, LGBTQ+, immigrant, and other marginalized communities integrated throughout education, or confined to a single lecture? Are students taught how bias influences diagnosis and treatment? Are they taught to recognize the difference between race as a social classification and genetic ancestry? Are diverse bodies represented in clinical images and dermatologic examples? Are students exposed to physicians with disabilities and other identities that challenge the traditional images of medical authority? And patients and community members can continue asking questions. Who benefits from research? How will my information be used? What alternatives are available? Can I take time to consider this decision? Can I have the information in writing? Can I bring someone with me? Can I request another opinion? Patient questions are not obstacles to good medicine. They are part of good medicine. In my final reflection, the goal of this episode is not to suggest that reading 3 books will make someone an expert in DEI. It will not. DEI is an ongoing practice. It requires humility. It requires continued education. It requires the ability to tolerate discomfort without immediately becoming defensive. And most importantly, it requires action. Reading can open the door, but after the door opens, we have to decide whether we are willing to walk through it. Are we willing to question traditions simply because they are familiar? Are we willing to acknowledge harm without centering our own discomfort? Are we willing to share authority? Are we willing to redesign systems? Are we willing to listen when someone describes an experience that does not match our own? And are we willing to recognize that medicine can be both extraordinary and imperfect? We can honor the life-saving power of medicine while confronting the harm committed in its name. We can celebrate scientific achievement while demanding ethical accountability. We can appreciate our institutions while insisting that they change. Those truths can exist together. The 3 books we discussed today are The Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Sacks by Rebecca Skloot, and Twice as Hard by Jasmine Brown. I encourage you to read them, discuss them with your colleagues, and consider creating a book discussion within your medical school, residency program, hospital, clinic, professional organization, or community. But do not allow the discussion to end with the final page of the book. Choose one lesson and connect it to action. Review a policy. Reconsider a research project. Mentor someone. Sponsor someone. Listen to a patient. Challenge a bias statement. Improve accessibility. Invite community voices into a decision-making space, because equity is not something that we merely believe. It's something we practice. Thank you for joining me for this DEI in Medicine Book Spotlight on the Mindful Practice Podcast. I'm Dr. Bertina Hooks, author of the upcoming memoir, From to Freedom, a memoir of transformation, renewal, and resilience. My own memoir explores what happens when a physician becomes a patient, how disability transformed my understanding of medicine, and how loss can become the beginning of renewal, reinvention, and freedom. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast, share the episode with a colleague, and leave a review wherever you listen. Until next time, continue practicing medicine, leadership, and life with intention, compassion, courage, and mindfulness. I'm Dr. Bertina Hooks, and this is the Mindful Practice Podcast. As I reflect on my own journey, I'm also reminded that some stories take years before you fully understand why you had to live them before you could tell them. This season has been especially meaningful for me because I recently signed a publishing contract for my upcoming memoir, Fire to Freedom, a journey of transformation, renewal, and resilience. In many ways, this book captures not only moments like the ones I share today, but the deeper journey of resilience, identity, healing, and becoming through personal adversity, professional growth, and life transitions that shaped who I am today. I will be sharing more in the months ahead as we move toward the book's release. But I wanted to mention it here because this story and many others live within those pages. Sometimes the chapters we survive quietly become the chapters we are later called to share. And if my story helps someone else believe that adversity does not disqualify purpose, then every chapter has meaning. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Practice Podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, you can find free burnout and career clarity resources at pinnaclebusinessacademy.org. And if this podcast supported you, please consider subscribing or sharing it with a colleague who might need it. Remember, you are more than your white coat. You are not broken, and you are allowed to evolve. Until next time, take care of yourself, not just your role.